Who are we picking at 52? Because I just took a peek at NBA Draft.net and it says Oso Ighodaro. So you want to start there?
Yeah, so what we look at is that it's probably going to be similar to TJD, where it's an older player. Probably this is going to be somebody that fits a role at that stage in the draft. Like, yes, I'm sure the Warriors and their fans would love to have a secondary scorer. You're unlikely to get that at 53 in any draft, and in particular this draft. So when you're looking at the second round, especially if you're not towards the top of the second round, you're really looking for players that can fit a role on a team. Or what he can do, he can pass a little bit. He's really athletic around the rim. I think he had a 39-inch max vert at the combine. He's long. The issues that he has and why he's in the 50 for us is he doesn't really shoot it great. He's roughly the same as TJD was last year in terms of free throw shooting, so around 63-65% free throw shooter. Doesn't really have much range from the outside, and he's on the thinner side as a player. So what he probably does better than TJD at this stage is pass. I would definitely see him as a backup TJD at this point, and he'll probably play some 4 as well. Let me go look real quick at his measurements. As you know, I'm a big measurements guy. So just for the average person, he measured at 6'9" without shoes, 6'11" wingspan, 8'5" standing reach. And for the best centers, ideally for a center possession, you want 9 standing reach. But he did really well in terms of max vert at 39.5, no vert at 35 inches. Had a good reaction shuffle time, had a good 3/4 speed time. And as I said, he's experienced, he's older, he's done well. I think he's currently roughly 22 years of age. So for this draft at that stage, 22 is actually relatively young. You're going to see guys that are 23, 24 years old at that stage of the draft.
What if he gets taken earlier? Who else do you have that would maybe fit the bill at 52?
Well, I know other mocks they've said Jalen Bridges, correct?
Right, yeah, saw that.
So Jalen Bridges is more of a 3-4 than a 4-5. He is a shooter. His measurements were 6'7"-ish, 6'10" wingspan, athletic as well. What you get out of him is probably, like I said, a 3-4 more than a 4-5. And when I say 3, that means forward. So small forward, power forward. 4-5 is power forward, center. A lot of experience with Baylor. Was a transfer, went to a few schools. A little bit older. Yeah, he's 23 years old. So again, a type that the Warriors have been leaning on towards the end of the second round last year. Obviously going with more experienced people that have gone through to college and have seen some things and they don't have quite the learning curve. And it seems like Warriors fans don't really want too much of somebody that won't contribute next year anyway. Just based on what I've heard, they want people obviously that can help Steph during his time. Now what they have to understand at 3, it's really hard to find somebody that can make a major contribution to a team. It's not impossible, but it is more difficult. There are a few things that the Warriors do have a benefit of relative to other teams that might draft higher. They have roster spots available. So, for example, the reason the Warriors were able to pry TJ away from other teams that may have drafted him a little higher in the second round is that they promised his agent a roster spot, meaning not a two-way contract, a standard NBA contract that was non-guaranteed that turns out to be very beneficial to the Warriors in the long run because he panned out, right? So they're a little bit in difficulty salary cap wise. But if you look at one of the most tradable assets they have is TJD's contract, because he's proven that he's an NBA player and his contract is really low. It's lower than the veteran minimum and for several years. So when super teams or teams that have established stars that are paying those guys 60 million, 40 to 60 million, when you have a contract that somebody is in the rotation top 10 guy, that's a lucrative thing to have. And that's really the first one that the Warriors have really been able to bank on, where they've done the non-guarantee route and have these salaries for 3 or 4 years. So one thing to think about in this draft is that maybe the Warriors are drafting at 53, but it's entirely possible that somebody that's viewed by most at 43, 42 may end up with them because of the role and the ability to promise a roster spot. Now, I'm not saying the Warriors are doing that. I have not heard that, but that is a selling point that they have relative to other teams that don't have many roster spots available.
Gotcha. Do we have the 53rd or the 52nd, or how does that work?
I think what on our site, the pick that's like forfeited is just says forfeited on it. So if you scroll up,
Yeah.
see the 49th pick. I can name you a couple other players that I think the Warriors may be interested in. I would say that those two seem to be the most popular ones, but I think we've gone offline a little bit. When we spoke, I said, I feel like Pelle Larsson is Kerr type of player. And not only because he went to the University of Arizona, but also because, and he's a guard, older player, originally from Sweden, went to the University of Utah before he went to U of A. But he's a connector type, and he's the one that moves the ball around, and he plays hard all the time. And it seems like, I would say he's not as good as Pods, but he has some connector similarities to Pods. So that could be somebody that I still think, we really do think that Ighodaro is going to be a pick, but I could definitely see that's a player that players with that Kerr and the management would be interested in at some level.
Yeah, I was just listening to you there, so I have to say, we want Ighodaro. No, I'm just kidding. It's the new we want Ighodaro. Oh man, that'd be funny. If he was the pick, someone's got to do that. Someone's got to do that meme. You heard that here first. But anyways,
why don't we talk a little bit about Jalen Wells, because he's in that range.
Yeah.
Jalen Wells is an interesting story. He was in junior college in the Bay Area and then played Division II in the Bay Area and then played 1 year at Washington State. And as many of you may or may not know, Washington State went pretty far in the NCAA tournament, and he was one of the main reasons why. He's a little bit younger than some of the other players that we've mentioned. He's a little bit more of a project and more of a development type player compared to the other, I would say, the other guys there. But you can tell just the fact that how he's moved up quickly, that some people may see him as having some upside relative to the other ones because they see him as a late bloomer type of player. He has potential as a 3-and-D player. Some of the things that didn't work out so well in his favor and why he's lower in the mock, he didn't measure great. And like a 3-and-D wing, usually you want 7 foot, 7'2" wingspan, and he did not measure like that at all. He measured 6'7", which wasn't bad, but his wingspan was nearly identical, 6'7.25". His standing reach was 8'7.5", and that hurt him in terms of moving up into the draft. In our opinion, obviously we don't know right is going to end up, but he kind of lost some momentum that was going his way going into the combine because people thought he was maybe a little bit longer, maybe a longer standing reach. He's more of an upside play relative to the other players that we mentioned.
Okay. All right. Anybody else?
I guess we could talk about Ulrich Chomche, because he decided to stay in the draft. He was at NBA. We may not have added him because we thought he was going to enter in 2025, but he's with Rich Paul and Clutch. He's one of the youngest players in the draft.
6'11".
In fact, he wouldn't be eligible if he was born in 2006, and he was born December 30th. Has a big wingspan. The reason he's not projected with the Warriors is because he's a long-term project player. He played at Nike Hoop Summit. He looked very raw there, but his age and his intangibles in terms of power forward center being 6'10.25", 7'4" wingspan relative to the other guys we talked about, 9'1.5" standing reach, and he had a 38.5 vert. He can jump. He can shoot the three a little bit, but he has some stiffness in the hips, so there is some lateral issue, even though he's that athletic. But he's a long-term guy. He's raw. He's not going to help the Warriors out next season. Unlikely. And that's why he hasn't been projected with the Warriors at all. But if you're looking for a high upside pick in that 50 range, that is a guy that I would consider. And I also would think that Rich Paul knows what he's doing and that he's going to somehow get drafted somewhere in the second round. And we could talk about Bronny if you want. I know Bronny James is a popular name. Saw him live in high school. He's a connector type of player, so that's something that the Warriors would like in terms of being able to pass it around and stuff. He's projected as a defender. He did not defend that well on occasions when he played. He did not have obviously a good season this year with USC. partially due to his slow start given his heart issue. So he was out, had to step away from basketball for a few months. He has a really long wingspan. Even though he's short, he's only 6'1", and he's not a point guard. He's a two guard. If you want to call him a combo guard, you could call that as well. I doubt that he would be running that many offenses at the NBA level, so that's part of the reason why we don't project him so high. He's athletic. He can shoot it a little bit, although he didn't show it in college this year. Great teammate, great passer, long wingspan, pretty good athlete. He's just very undersized for what position he should ideally play. So hence why we have him in the fees. But I know that that's a player that people want to talk about. So would I have him in my top 60? Probably not. Do I think that he deserved to go to the combine and that he has the talent for it? Yes, because I know some people say, well, he only scored, I think, 4 points or 5 points per game. I just want to remind everybody that Derek Lively only scored 5 points per game last year, his only year in college. So, and Lively seems to have been a good pick for the Dallas Mavericks. So just want to remind people, it's not just nepotism. He is an almost level player. For me, he's probably in the 70s to 80 range, but that's a difference of opinion. Yeah. And we'll go over one more since I see his name. Isaac Jones is also a Washington State player, also a late bloomer. Unlike Jalen Wells, he's older. He's 23 years old. We have to remember that Washington State's coach, who's now Stanford's coach, recruits guys that he feels like have high basketball IQ. So both Jalen Wells and Isaac Jones were viewed as high basketball IQ level players. Now, what's interesting about Isaac Jones, and he may or may not get drafted because, as you know, once we're going in the 15 ranges, there's a question mark there. If you look at his height, he's only 6'8", but he has a 7'3" wingspan and a 9-foot standing reach, which is great for a power forward, which is manageable as a center. He had a pretty good vert. He played himself up. So the older, lesser viewed guys go to the Portsmouth Invitational. So he started there. He did so well, he got invited to the NBA G League Combine. He did well there, and he got invited all the way to the NBA Combine. So it tells you, like, in a few months, he moved way up in terms of where he was ranked in NBA circles and on their boards and stuff. And it's partially because he wasn't always a Division I player either. He was a transfer from lower level basketball.
But is there a chance that the Warriors actually might trade up a little bit in terms of, I'm seeing some of the names that you've mentioned last time with us, whether it's, you mentioned Jalen Wells, Ighodaro seems to be gaining traction late. It's like they're all moving up in the second round still, so you can still get them on the Trace Jackson Davis contract type of deal. But what do you think of the Warriors' 52nd position?
Based on the information that I got over the weekend at Section 7, which is a big, huge high school tournament where you interact with a lot of college coaches, I would say that Jalen Wells will not be available at 52. I think he goes top in the late 20s to late 30s. So he's 25 to 40 range.
I saw Ighodaro get on somebody else's mock, obviously, and everything varies. But why do you think Ighodaro doesn't get picked until the Warriors?
As we spoke about earlier, he's a little bit on the thin side, big. He's athletic, as we mentioned last time. He's a little bit older player, and that's another reason why he gets a little bit lower in terms of why he's not going to be drafted as high. And then in the second round, it's a lot about fit on teams. So they're going to not always draft maybe the top talent, but they have players in tiers, I think you've heard very frequently. So they'll put guys at like 1 tier, 2 tier, 3 tier, 4 tier. Let's say he's a 4-tier player. Then they're going to look into fit a little bit more, how he fits with the Warriors. If they're asking you why it won't be Ulrich, it's because he has very high upside, and that height is wrong on the site. It should not be 6'7". I don't know why they said he's like 6'10", 6'11".
I actually like the projects.
Well, everybody likes the high upside projects, except when Warriors fans say, hey, how are we going to help Steph now? He's not going to be a good player that's going to help Steph in the next 2-3 years. He's a long-term.
What would be like your top 5 most likely? One probably is Ighodaro at 52, right?
Yeah, and Jalen Bridges is high up there. Pelle Larsson is high up there. Those would be 3.
Pelle. And who would be 4th? would you say, if you had to rank them?
For the Warriors, maybe Adem Bona.
Right.
I think Cam Spencer would have some interest, but I don't think he's going to last to the 50. I think he goes mid-40s.
And Pat Spencer's brother.
Yes.
Oh, real quick, Kashad Johnson. Yeah, that's a name that I've seen.
I was talking to the U of A coaches this weekend, and they were more confident that Larsson gets drafted at Johnson.
Okay.
I'm not saying he's not going to. I'm just saying they were more confident about it. Kashad Johnson reminds me a little bit of JTA. Now, Aaron, who does the mock and stuff, disagrees with that comparison. I think there's a little bit of JTA in him. He's an undersized 4. He hasn't proved to be the defender that JTA is yet, and hasn't developed his shot quite as much. But if you remember JTA when he was in college, he hadn't developed those things a bit either.
Just to reinforce our knowledge of Ighodaro, not really a shooter, right?
No.
Can't really shoot. He's more of a 5.
He could pass a little bit though.
Yeah, Keith Smith actually was gushing about Ighodaro's passing ability. Like, we haven't seen a center pass like him. It's like one every 7 drafts that you'd see a guy that could pass like that. What's your feeling on that aspect?
I don't know about once every 7 draft, but he is a very good passer, and that would work well in the Warriors offense. I think what I'm concerned about is he going to be able to defend the bigs right away? I'm not saying he's not eventually going to. He's athletic and he can pass. And then again, the other thing is he too much of a duplicate for TJD? Yes, he's a little bit taller than TJD, but TJD is a little bit thicker. They are pretty athletic. He for us last year was projected at, remember, I was considering him at the Pods pick. We were really into TJD. We said it was a little high and that maybe they could trade down and get TJD. As I recall, that's what was on the pod. I mean, obviously they did pretty well both with Pods and TJD. To answer that question is Looney going to be on the team before the season starts?
So if they do draft Ighodaro, would you think that they're going to move Looney in a trade?
Not necessarily, but it could be a possibility, a definite possibility.